Hello, everybody. We're only a small webinar, so if you have got things to say, it would be really great if we can turn this into a discussion rather than a fight between me and Gabby. She always asks questions that really make me think about things, so save me from Gabby. Ask me other questions instead. So yeah, feel brave and just kind of like pop up your hand or put something in the chat box. This is your time with lots of other teachers where I always find that I learn things because, I'm used to doing things in a certain way that work for me. Maybe somebody else does it in a different way that works for them, but that's something that I can take away and learn from. Absolutely. I liked your idea, Hedy, of in the chat box earlier saying when you put a wavy line under a student's bit of written work, that's your kind of like code for saying this bit isn't exactly clear. So that's a really useful thing to think about and to take away. So yeah, I'm opening up the floor to anybody who might want to pitch in with comments or questions. Otherwise, Gabby, I've got to start hiding from you.
Yeah, I don't think
They're all shy.
yeah, I wonder, I think what we could do, Susie, perhaps we could start by um eliciting um what we all think about teaching writing. Okay,
Mm.
so before we actually start talking about error correction, how do you guys feel, when I say guys, I mean everybody who
People.
is attending today, how do you feel about teaching writing in a general English class? Because obviously, Susie, I really liked how you differentiated between ESOL and EFL, because it's a very important difference, in particular when it comes to writing skills, because
Mm-hmm.
ESOL students have very clear-cut goals. So writing lessons are very, very practical, right? I mean, ESOL students want to learn how to apply for a job, how to request a refund, how to complain. So very, very practical language that they need to learn. But you see, EFL students, to be honest, the reason why I'm asking this question is because I have mixed feelings about teaching writing in a general English class. And obviously, there is no right or wrong answer here. I have to, I think I have to be honest. And I have to say that last time I taught a writing lesson was probably when I was doing my Delta. So about
Mm-hmm.
15 years ago. So you see, this is how I actually feel um, about teaching writing skills. So I just wonder if someone could convince me otherwise, if someone could actually talk me into teaching writing. Because I understand exam classes, I understand ESOL. I simply can't see how, I mean, I was a general English student at some point in my life, and I have to say that I never could see why I was doing writing in class. I never could see why I should be even expected to write at a click of, teachers' fingers. Like, people write, when we write, we need to have, it has to be the right moment, the right place. Writing is not like speaking. So I really felt I was avoiding, like, if I when I knew that it was going to be a writing lesson, I just wouldn't go to school. So I like writing, don't get me wrong, it's just that I didn't see any, I just didn't see the point of doing writing in class when other students were sitting next to me, behind me, in front of me, and I had to focus and write. I just didn't see the point. So I just wonder how you feel about it, and and how other teachers feel about it as well. Because don't get me wrong, I don't mean to kind of, discourage teachers from teaching writing skills. I'm talking about my personal perceptions and my personal experience as a learner as well.
I think that's so interesting, Gabby. And yeah, thank you for sharing your experience as a learner. And I guess I'm wondering if the teachers can have some input here as well. I'm wondering how much of students' perceptions of writing is influenced from their teachers' perception of writing.
Mm.
You know, it could be that sort of thing of like learned behavior. You know, I had lots of friends when I was at school whose mothers were afraid of spiders, and so they were afraid of spiders. Whereas in my house, we had a big daddy longlegs that lived in the area in the gas cupboard, and every evening he'd like, you know, come out for a little stroll across the carpet. And so in my family, spiders were kind of like, you know, honorary pets. And I wonder if the same thing happens sometimes with writing, that teachers kind of feel, oh, okay, so now we've got to do some writing because it's in the course book or it's on the curriculum. And if somehow that feeling is passed down to the learners,
Mm.
because I feel that when I'm teaching writing, as I say, sometimes I don't even tell them I'm teaching writing, because that the affective filters will rise.
Mm.
You know, if you tell students it's going to be a grammar lesson and they have a self-perception of they're bad at grammar, then, you know, the blocks come up, the barriers come up, and they're like, oh, I'm scared of grammar. Or, you know, we're going to be teaching writing. And if it's said with us, so writing is like dull and boring and time consuming and pointless, you know, it's unsurprising, isn't it, that learners kind of feel, why am I wasting my time when I'm surrounded by people I could be speaking to? So I think
Yeah.
that's a really, really interesting question. So I'm wondering if anybody's got thoughts, because I know we've got some, you know, some non-native English teachers as well
Mm.
in our group. So you've got an
And
advantage over me.
yeah, and you see, and it's not even that again, don't get me wrong, because it's not that my students don't write. They
Mm,
do, and they actually write a lot, but they do it at home.
yeah.
So whatever they write, they do it at home, and then they just bring their homework for correction, not
Hmm.
for marking even, because I wouldn't mark um, general students writing. I mean, I personally wouldn't do it. So yeah, so I wonder if, I mean, we would really like you guys to talk to us, because my problem, this is a genuine problem. Today I'm not being the devil's advocate. Today I'm actually
Really want to know.
yeah, today I'm actually telling you how I really feel about teaching writing, and then I'll tell you how I feel about error correction as well, because
Mm.
I think I have my take on error correction.
And I
So,
think that's why these discussions and webinars are so interesting, because, you know, people are with us here now that work in different parts of the world. And it's really interesting to hear, well, it's this way in Asia and it's just, that's how it is, but it's this way in France and that's how it is. And it's this way in Colombia, you
yeah,
know, and it's really interesting just to kind of get a sense of maybe what's expected from the institution that you work in. You know, maybe expectations when you work in a university are different from if you're teaching general English in a summer school, you know, when the learners are with you for like maybe 2 weeks maximum, you know. And I think Gabby's, you know, absolutely spot on there, that if you've got students that are here for a week or 2 weeks, you know, is there an argument that you just bypass writing completely when they're in the country to work on fluency, communication, and just navigating through a day? You know, it is really surprising how little we need writing as a skill, particularly these days. We've all got mobile devices, haven't we?
I also feel that you see, it's easier with other skills, in particular with speaking, because like if people want to, if students want to improve their communicative ability, their speaking, then really and truly everybody has the same needs. Obviously students have different needs, but it's improving speaking, right? You
Mm-hmm.
see, with writing, I feel that every single student has a different reason for writing.
Mm-hmm.
So, and this just adds to the problem of kind of setting just one task, for the whole class, knowing that every single person writes for a different reason, because writing is not like speaking. Okay, so I mean, obviously on a one-to-one basis, it's easy. You have your one-to-one student and you know exactly what the student needs. But when you have a group of students and it's a general English class, I just really struggle to accommodate a writing lesson into the syllabus, you know,
Yeah.
into the program.
Yeah.
That's
And I
why I
think,
do it, always set it as homework.
yeah, I think I'm with you on that. And I think sometimes the hardest part about writing for the learners is actually the brainstorming bit. It's the coming up with ideas, and it's the language input that they need from us. And that's where I think as teachers, that's where our value is in the classroom, by helping them, you know, brainstorm ideas, organize ideas, you know, think about the structure of paragraphs, you know, input some language, you know, for contrasting opinions or whatever it might be. But then the actual writing will be done at home, because the time in the classroom can be better spent. And of course, as you're moving up through the levels, you know, you need to kind of do writing in the exam classes, because then it's under timed conditions. You know, I'm sure you've had the experience, you know, people teaching here as well, that, you know, you say to the students, okay, this is your homework, give yourself 20 minutes, and they'll come back with a piece of work that you know full well has taken them 2.5 hours to complete. You know, it's just kind of like, yeah, this is really good, and I'm not trying to be detrimental, but did you really do that in 20 minutes? Did you?
Yeah.
You know, and did you
Yeah.
not use your computer or Google Translate or whatever else was available? Heidi, you're blushing. It's like I've set you homework and you're blushing because you're like, I did that. I'm that learner.
Yeah. Yeah.
But it's
I
human instinct, isn't it? It's like, you know, we want to do the best that we can do. And I think that's one of the differences, the main differences between speaking and writing. You know, speaking is ethereal. It's out there and then it's gone. You know, if I'm committing pen to paper and people are going to be looking at it and judging it and assessing it, then I want it to be perfect.
Yeah.
So I understand the reticence that a lot of people sometimes feel about writing, because it's kind of like bearing your soul with mistakes and all.
This is actually a very good point. And if I may change the direction of this discussion a little bit now, let's talk about error correction, because you actually mentioned that speaking is different from writing, because writing is actually, you can see it, okay? So writing lasts, right? You have evidence of your, some kind of an evidence of your language on paper.
Yeah.
So to me, this actually complicates my life as a teacher, because when you do error correction, okay, and it's oral errors, okay, then obviously it's easier to just select errors that you want to correct and let go of other errors, because there is no evidence of those errors that you let go of, right? But when students submit a piece of writing, and as you said earlier, you encourage teachers not to correct all the errors in students' writings, then what happens if, for example, if you decide to correct some of the errors and then you let go, you know, you just ignore other errors and say, in 6 months' time, the same student is going to revisit this piece of writing. And obviously, the student will now be under the impression that whatever language they put in this writing, everything was okay apart from the errors corrected. So you see, I feel like, because when I was a student, again, I used to do it. I used to keep all my writings. And then, you know, after some time, I would just go and read whatever I wrote 6 months ago, just to get the feel of how I may have improved, okay? But then that means if you don't correct all the errors, it means that there is actually something that I may think is correct because you didn't correct it for a good reason, okay? So what can we do in this situation? How can we ensure that we avoid this this problem, this situation, that students go back to what they wrote 6 months ago and they can see that there are errors because their English is now much better. They can see the errors and they wonder, yeah, but okay, if it's an error, then why didn't the teacher correct it?
For me, if we're talking about dealing with adults, then again, I believe in being, relatively transparent with adults. And so I might choose to tell them, when I give you your written work back, I may not have corrected every mistake, but I'm selecting the mistakes that I think will most benefit you to work on now. Because again, I do think it's really demotivating when they just have 50 smatterings of red, in the same way that, when you're having a conversation with a learner, as a teacher, you're automatically filtering out the mistakes they're making, and you're only going to give your focus to the kind of maybe the two major mistakes that are getting in the way of communication. So I see nothing wrong with telling your learners, I am not going to correct every mistake and I'm doing it for your benefit. And I guess that, if the student is going to go back and revisit that work in 6 months' time and notice the errors, then isn't that great vindication of all of the autonomous training you've been giving them, of being able to proofread and self-correct, and also for them to recognize their development. I think it's different with kids, kids don't think that deeply about it, do they?
Yeah, I was actually hoping you would say that. So I love your answer, because that's exactly how I do it. I always
Yeah.
say to my students that, look, there are errors that I'm not going to correct.
Hmm.
And the reason is because I want you to see clearly what the most immediate problem is,
Yeah.
and you only focus on this. Sometimes I actually correct all the errors, but then the most immediate ones I highlight. So effectively, I ask students not to look at the other corrections, just
Hmm.
focus on this. And once you highlight it, then you can, like, students can see how they are improving, because they can see that the highlighted bits are fewer and fewer, right?
Yeah.
So if it's articles, say, or prepositions, or then they can see that, the second writing has fewer highlights, highlighted bits, and then the next one has fewer highlighted bits. So this is another way how I deal with it. But yeah, I really like your answer, because I personally believe we should be doing what you kind of, suggested and advised in the video. We shouldn't be correcting all the errors, but at the same time, we need to remember that, because writing is not like speaking, and
Mm.
students may want to go back, they need to be fully aware that there will be errors that you are not going to correct.
Yeah. I think
So,
that's a really good point, Gabby, about correcting everything, but maybe highlighting the things to work on for now. I've done something similar in the past, but with numbering, so maybe there's 17 errors, and they're generally, grammar or punctuation or spelling. And the grammar areas will be the ones that I want them to focus on, especially this day and age. If people are doing written work online, then Word can correct things for you, which can be a good thing and can be a negative thing. But if students just run a simple spell check, 8 times out of 10, the mistake will be caught. It doesn't work, obviously, for your homonyms of words that sound the same but are spelled differently. So if you're using the wrong meat in a sentence, then that could be a problem, because your MEET is recognized, as is MEAT, but it could be the wrong word in that particular sentence. But I think, again, because I'm working with adults mostly, I don't see any reason why we can't just be open and honest with them. And again, that could be a two-way conversation. So that could be a student coming to me and saying, okay, I know you said this is how you work, but actually, I'm really keen to improve myself. I'm really keen to get better. I don't mind if you're hard on me. Then I think that's a conversation that I'm open to as well.
sorry. I wonder how you also feel about doing writing in class, but writing that you never look at. So it's kind of integrating writing into other tasks and activities.
Mm.
So you see, this is something because when I think about it, my students actually do a lot of writing in class, because I always get them to, I love, jigsaw activities, like
Hmm.
where then, you know, in groups they have to write a report on, you know, another group or summarize their findings. So they always write, but I never look at it, because obviously then they talk about it. So they write everything and then they present it to the rest of the class. So how do you feel about, or how do you think this type of writing may be effective or maybe ineffective? Because obviously nobody marks it.
I think there's perfect justification for allowing the students to note take. And, you know, depending on the level that I'm working with, if I ask them to do a task that requires note taking at my elementary level, I might say it's okay if you scribble things down in L1, because actually the outcome of the task is then to present the story, you know, to the class. So it's the speaking that I actually want to focus on. It isn't the writing. So I think there's an absolute, you know, argument for not correcting every physical thing that the learner writes down, because there will be times in the lesson when we just want them to, like, you know, to take notes, or, you know, write annotations, or if the writing isn't the outcome that we're looking for. You know, if it's a controlled practice activity, then I might go around and just like cast my eye over spelling. Although online, you know, it's way more challenging because I don't have access to what every learner is doing unless they're all doing something together on Google Docs. So I definitely think that, you know, moving teaching from face to online has definitely thrown up challenges for writing, because the same way in a classroom, I can move around my horseshoe and I can kind of, like, you know, correct as I go because I'm used to reading upside down and I know the kind of mistakes they make. Whereas, you know, if I'm asking for writing to be emailed to me, that feels like it's suddenly much more work and much more time consuming, you know? So I'm okay with, like, you know, not correcting every single thing that goes on in the classroom, because I think if the main aim is speech, then the writing is kind of just the support that the speech will sit on, for sure.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. Yes. So now I have loads of questions for you.
Mhm.
As you know, I always do. I mean, but my questions are not really questions. They are problems I struggle.
Yeah, it's discussion, isn't it? Absolutely. We've all got things to, you know, to offer, things to share.
Yeah, I mean, another thing that I wanted to ask you was, this is actually quite tricky, okay? And it's not just about written error, it's about error correction in general.
Mhm.
And it's about fossilization and fossilized errors.
Yeah.
Now, I was some time ago, quite some time ago, I was actually reading something written by Scott Thornberry, who I'm a great fan. And he actually made a comment about fossilized errors and habitual mistakes.
Mhm.
And I wonder how, because obviously you mentioned students confusing de and das, right? The little, you know, s for third
Yeah.
singular. And then you said that we should be correcting the mistakes, the errors we know that students know.
Mhm.
Okay. Now that makes me, that when I heard you say this, it just took me back to this article that I read. And my question is, do we really, hold on, because, you know, now I feel like, you know, I don't know how to start to get, you know, to get my point across. Scott Thornberry wrote that there are certain errors that students make, in particular, the third singular s, do,
Mhm.
does. There are certain errors that we wouldn't call errors. We would obviously call mistakes,
Mhm.
okay? And perhaps we should drop correction of those altogether, because it's totally ineffective, because it means that students know, we know they know, but at the same time, for whatever reason, and it's a natural process, they
Mhm.
are not able to correct themselves. So our correction is ineffective, and we are wasting our time focusing on something that they should be getting right, but they are not. So this idea of correcting what we know students know is not always the way to go, I
Yeah.
think.
Yeah.
Okay. And then fossilized errors, to me, are actually things that we know students don't know.
Okay.
So I mean, a fossilized error would be something, to me, something that I learned a long time ago, say a collocation that I have been using, for years. Nobody told me it was wrong. And this is a fossilized error. So it's actually something that we know students don't know, and this is what we correct. Whereas habitual mistakes are the mistakes that we should just ignore, because even though it's very important not to confuse do and does, even though it's very important to remember to add the little s, our correction is ineffective.
Yeah.
So I just wonder how you feel about this, because it's a very, very difficult area to kind of get your thoughts right,
Yeah, definitely. No, I thank you for bringing that up. I think that's a really important distinction. And given the tight time frame of 35 minutes in the webinar, I chose not to kind of differentiate too much between errors, mistakes, and slips. If we're talking theoretically, there are big differences between errors, mistakes, and slips. And as you just pointed out, Gabby, habitual mistakes versus fossilized errors, there's a distinction there as well. And I think there's absolutely, evidence for, the Scott Thornbury school of thinking to be correct. Native speakers say, she don't do this and she don't do that. This is the language that you're going to hear on EastEnders, on Coronation Street. So if the learners are living in this country and they're, exposed to natural native speaker speech, then they're probably picking up these mistakes from the fact that native speakers are making them. And I think it's right to be accepting of habitual mistakes that if we told them, they're like, yeah, grammatically I know that's true, but actually I've been saying it so long now, the fluency is just going to get interrupted. If it's accepted from a native speaker, why can't it be accepted from a non-native speaker? Is it considered a grammatical mistake when a native speaker makes that mistake? Well, then it shouldn't be considered a mistake if it's being made by a non-native speaker.
Yeah, and I often feel that we, or many teachers, get kind of hung up on kind of ineffective error correction.
Yeah.
As opposed to just helping students develop, kind of learn more language and more collocations, and just certain errors are we just have to let go.
Absolutely. Just, shrug our shoulders and go, it is what it is. And I'm okay with that. I think I work very much depending on the client that I'm working with. If I'm working with, an executive one-on-one who's delivering a big presentation to a sales conference in 6 months, and he really wants to work on his pronunciation, then yes, we're going to look at, his pronunciation, his errors, his collocation. If I'm working with a general English class who are going to be with me for 2 weeks, or if I'm working with a B1 group who I'm going to have for 4 or 6 weeks, then my attitude towards error and mistakes and correction will be different according to the client needs, if you like. So I think I can be absolutely forgiving of slips, mistakes that they make. It just so happens that I've got quite clear pronunciation and I've got quite a wide vocabulary, so I take pride in my language. But other people are just more focused on getting the message across, and I totally understand that for a non-native speaker, that's equally as important as well. So I think because of my years of experience as well, and also my time teaching in different parts of the world, and I spent 4 years, teaching CELTA in Dublin, to get an Irish trainee to make the sound created by the letters TH is nigh on impossible. If I force them to go, tongue out between teeth, and it's 1, 2, 3, not 1, 2, 3, but you know, away from me, they're never going to say 1, 2, 3. It's always going to be 1, 2, 3. And that's what they're going to teach. And that's the mistake they're going to pass down to their students. Whereas like now there are allophones, which are kind of like, you know, more equally accepted as an acceptable alternative. You know, so I would say mother, father. Other people, British people, will say mother, father. Is it wrong? Well, no, it's an allophone. It's an equally accepted way of speaking. And these native speakers, if they're teaching English, are going to, you know, do pronunciation drills where their students are going to be copying mother, father, 1, 2, 3. So, you know, I think because English is now an international language, and I would say what, like 75% of communication probably happens between non-native speakers of English. You know, you might have somebody in China communicating with somebody in Turkey, so they're doing it through the medium of English. Neither is, you know, is the first language. I think, you know, as teachers, we do have to let go of the crazy idea of perfection. And I know that we've had conversations around perfection before, and I'm not a perfectionist. I think it's an unrealistic expectation to impose on our learners and impose on ourselves as teachers. We're humans. We get things wrong. We make mistakes. We make things up. And I think, you know, when I'm teaching my learners, I really want confidence to be at the heart of what I teach them, so that they've got the confidence, if not the language, to be able to communicate what they mean. And I've done this myself. You know, when I was living in France, I forgot the word for like a bottle opener. And I had to go into a wine shop and say, you know, in French, I need the thing that does this, you know, and I've got the confidence to make a fool of myself with mime. I'm okay with that. When I was living in Libya, you know, and I needed an orange juice squeezer, like I don't even know the proper word in English. Do you know what I mean? But like one of those things. So I knew the word for orange and I was like, naranja, you know, cut my naranja. This, I need this. You know, like my Arabic was hideous. I had maybe 10 words of vocabulary, but I had the confidence to communicate what I wanted. So I think for me, that's one of my fundamental pillars of teaching, is to give my learners the confidence to play with language, to make mistakes and to experiment and get things wrong, because that's where the greatest learning happens, I feel, in lots of ways.
Yeah, yeah. I have one more question,
Okay.
Susie. And again, I'm really interested to know how you feel about this. Reformulation as
Mm.
a error
Oral method.
technique. Yeah, but reformulation for written error. So obviously we know how it works with oral errors.
Mm.
But how do you feel about it in terms of correcting students' writing?
I think that's a really tricky one, because I've worked with Chinese speakers in EAL in universities, and you know, their handwriting is beautiful, but their content is hideous. And trying to understand sometimes what they mean when almost every other word is clearly being gotten from Google Translate is really challenging. So I think, you know, for me, that's again working with individuals, that sometimes I'll underline a sentence and say, I don't know what you mean by this. Or sometimes I might rewrite it because they haven't got the ability yet. And I think that in the same way, when we're modeling oral English, you know, we're modeling language that we want our learners to take and to copy and to use. I feel the same way about writing sometimes, you know, but again, I think when I'm correcting, I'm not correcting as Susie Bridges, the wannabe creative writer, you know, who's very articulate and has got a great vocabulary. I'm correcting as Susie Bridges, the teacher of A2, you know, so I don't expect you to be able to use a highfalutin fancy pants sentence, but I do expect you to know at least 3 alternative adjectives for nice.
Mm.
So I think I level my correction according to who I'm working with, but I see no reason why you can't use written reformulation as another tool of providing learners with a model. Because
Yeah,
I mentioned in the video that I think giving them a model of what to work towards or what to aspire to, or to look at the difference between where are you and where do you need to be by exam time, I think that can be really useful for the learner.
Yeah, I mean, the reason why I'm asking is obviously because, you know, you're a CELTA trainer as well, so you know how it is. It's
Hmm.
not something that we tell trainees to do. I mean, we encourage trainees to use the correction code. That's it, and elicit self-correction. And I personally, again, I'm speaking from my experience as a learner, and I have to say that I really welcomed reformulation.
Hmm.
And I really liked the teachers who, and I'm not talking about A2 level, I'm talking about advanced and proficiency.
Yeah.
I really was felt grateful to the teacher who was giving me more collocations and more ideas
Hmm.
to actually add to my vocabulary bank by
Yeah.
reformulating sentences. And obviously it means that nothing is wrong with what the student has written, but we are kind of showing students how they could do it in a different way. And I think
Exactly.
it's a brilliant way of doing error correction.
I
Um,
think so too. Yeah. I'm sorry about the low lighting, people. I'm mindful that the light is fading outside. So my camera is getting a bit fuzzy at the moment, but hopefully you can bear with me for 10 minutes before I become a shadowy nothing. But I think this idea of like aspirational writing as well, or aspirational speaking, Gabby, is really important. Again, one of my fundamental pillars of teaching is I see myself as a model, especially when I'm working in other countries. Like I am an example of British society. So how I behave, the things I say, the things that I do in my normal life, apart from the fact that I don't drink tea even, which makes me atypical. But I think the learners are interested to know, okay, here's where I am, here's where I think I could be, and they don't need to know that, I'm never going to make it as a creative writing novelist. That's okay. Most people aren't interested in becoming a creative writer or a novelist. But I think aspiring to want to be better and to do better. And again, as you move up through the levels, especially as you said, your B2s, your C1s, they've got a good range of vocabulary. So they really value reformulation because now they can really start to learn other ways of expressing themselves
yeah,
because they understand the main foundations of grammar. They've got a good grasp of vocabulary. Now they want to get creative. They want to start playing with language. They want to be able to kind of stretch themselves and use their imagination. And so I definitely think that reformulation is a really important part of helping them aspire to be better, because I think a lot of your higher level learners, they reach that plateau, don't they? And they
yeah,
lose their motivation of like, well, I know I'm pretty good at like, my past perfect tenses, or, I know the difference between present perfect simple and continuous, but they can still aspire to be better by increasing their range of vocabulary and by getting creative with metaphors and simile, or, depending on what they're writing, just organization even can get better.
yes, yes. And I feel that you know, writing at B2 level is actually, I mean, a written text, a text written by a student, again, is a springboard for further teaching. So
Hmm.
this is the student generated material.
Yeah.
So and 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 it's the best way to actually build on what students already know.
Yeah.
So yeah, I mean,
I think
absolutely.
I think that's one of the long forgotten things about writing, that it's a self-differentiating task. So when you've got a group, where you've got this massive difference between the bottom end of the group and the top end of the group, but they're still all B1s, your B1 who's just come up from pre-intermediate is going to be very different from somebody who's almost ready to switch to an FCE class. So, writing is a fantastic differentiation activity where you set the task, they go off into their own little world and do their own little thing, and then the writing that you get back, you work on based on the learner in front of you. So I think that's definitely something to recommend writing as well, that, as a teacher, you don't have to worry about how you differentiate your input. You just set the task, do the brainstorming, and then work with what you're given.
Yeah, 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 yeah. And it's also great for students to, it's a different way of making students aware of mistakes and
Hmm.
errors they make, right? Because if we correct, or when we correct oral errors, students may notice will notice, may not
May
notice.
not, yeah.
But then again, if we show the same student the same mistakes they make, but this time on paper,
Mhm.
it's almost like, you know, the exposure to
Yeah.
own errors is different, because and it's just raising their awareness of what their language looks like, right?
Mhm.
And what errors are habitual mistakes and
Yeah.
what to
I
work on.
agree, and I think the two productive skills, the speaking and writing, kind of feed into each other equally. You know, like you can argue. I mean, for example, in my productive skills session, you know, you brainstorm all the ideas in the lesson. The writing takes place outside the lesson because the hard part for the learners is the ideas generation. You know, once they've, and I think this is one of the problems with teaching English as well. You know, like some people are not naturally imaginative or creative, never mind trying to do that in L2 or L3 or L4. So I think it's super important as teachers that we remember we're not testing their imagination or testing their creativity. We're going to provide them with everything that they need, and it's how they put that together that we're assessing, not, you know, whether or not they come up with the world's best idea for something. That isn't what's important. And I think if you've done a speaking task in class and the homework is then write it, then the writing has got much more chance of being more accurate because they've already had time to play through some of the language and they've been able to hear other bits of language from their classmates. And then all of this can be absorbed and consolidated into a piece of writing. Similarly, you could argue that if I go away and do a piece of writing that I'm then asked to give a presentation on, you know, is my speaking going to be better because I've actually thought about what I'm writing, and so some of these phrases are stuck in my head. So I think, you know, they feed very much into each other, like, you know, like an
Yeah,
interlocking link.
yeah, I absolutely agree. Yeah, yeah, yeah. Hedy, did you want to add something from the perspective of a language learner as a student? When you look back, how did you feel about writing in class and writing in general? I'm just curious to know.
As a kid, as a child, it was, I felt so like demotivated by getting a piece of my writing back, you know, full of red. There was no explanation to that. It's
Mhm.
just so, and I was like eager to improve, you know, my writing skills, but I didn't really, you know, get enough help. But I think it has changed, but it also depends on the number of the students in class. So when you have, you know, we still have classes where there are like 25 students, you know, in class. So it's so different from like smaller classes where you have, I don't know, 5 to 12 students.
Mhm.
And yeah, so
I think you just raised a really important point, Hetty. And if I'm going to finish on anything, it's this. And I wonder if it's your experience as a child learning English that has made you become hyper aware of this as a teacher, but praising the stuff they do well. I think it's really important to find a balance. Yes, error correction is important for their development, but I think it's super important to remember the content, the message. You know, if they're writing a story, brilliant, you know, you had great ideas. So I think a balance of making sure that you acknowledge the human aspect of the writing as well, you know, so that they've got that feeling of a sense of accomplishment, a sense of achievement, not just, I love that analogy, a page of blood. So I would definitely encourage all teachers watching that if you don't already, just make a mental note to just have a sentence about something that the learner did well, or, you know, a little happy face by, you know, a couple of words that, you know, you were surprised that they used accurately, or if they were playing with language and they got something right, you know, remembering to praise what they're doing well as draw their attention to how they could improve is important too.